Good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a good weekend. Weather was very nice. All right, so today we're going to finish up chapter 18. We're going to do part two, the fall of Berlin. In part one, we talked about how the Soviets were pushing through, after the Battle of Kursk, pushing through Poland, the Warsaw Uprising. And now we're going to go into the last section, which is the fall of Berlin. Now, on January 25th, 1945, what was left of the German army of the Eastern Front was formed to protect Berlin from the Soviet army. But by March 20th, there were 2.5 million Soviet soldiers and over 7,000 tanks on the east bank of the Oder River. They're only 60 miles from Berlin. I'll show you here on the map. As you can see here, they're right to the Oder River, very close to Berlin. The panic was setting in. Now, a new general, well, he wasn't really new, Gotthard Henrici was put in charge. He prepared the defenses. He was really good at doing this. He was actually a cousin of von Rundstedt, and strangely enough, he married a half-Jew, and this was okayed by Hitler. He was an excellent defensive tactician. After ordering a retreat in 1945, he was relieved of command by Hitler, and one of the things Hitler gave was this order to destroy everything. He refused to follow it. He actually lived after the war till 1971. Now, unfortunately for the Germans, there was not much left to fight as far as to put up their defenses. Now, the Battle of Seelow Heights. This would be the last defense by the Germans. On April 16th, the Soviets under Zhukov launched a massive attack across the Oder River. Now, the Seelow Heights were called the gates to Berlin. This was the last line of defense. For 3 days, 100,000 Germans held off 1 million Soviets crossing the Oder River. The Germans actually destroyed 2,800 Soviet tanks. Unfortunately for them, there were thousands more. The Germans had limited supplies and no air cover, so it really couldn't last. And after 3 days, the Soviets finally overwhelmed the German defenders, and they break through the German lines. The Eastern Front just doesn't exist anymore. Right now, it's just a free-for-all as the Soviets rush west towards Berlin. And there's nothing to stop them. On April 20th, Hitler celebrates his 56th birthday in the bunker in Berlin. Now we're going to talk about the end of Mussolini. Now, Mussolini had been in northern Italy since his rescue in 1943. If you remember, he was kicked out of power by the Italian government after the loss of Sicily. Now, he was a leader, excuse me, of the Italian Social Republic, but he was really a puppet. Got my throat here. Really a puppet of Germany. He had a number of the fascists who had been with him and who he felt betrayed him, executed, put on trial. We mentioned one of them earlier. Another one was actually his son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano, who had signed a number of the treaties for him. Now, in April of 1945, Mussolini, his mistress, and a dozen members of his government tried to escape to Switzerland. They didn't make it. They were caught. On April 27th, the Mussolini and the group were stopped by communist partisans. The next day, they decided to shoot them. So they just put them all against the wall, shot them, and their bodies were actually taken to Milan and hung in a gas station. This was the famous picture of them being hung up by their ankles. Hitler found out about it, and he was determined that this was not going to happen to him. Now, on April 29th, all the German forces in Italy, about 1 million men, surrender. All right, now we're going to talk about the Battle of Berlin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, April 20th, Hitler's birthday, the Soviets reach the outskirts of Berlin. They're out in the suburbs. Now, Hitler decides to remain in the city down in his bunker. Here we see a picture of the chancellery. This was the gardens, and beneath it, they built an air raid shelter, which is going to become Hitler's home for the last few months of his life. Now, the Soviets start shelling the city. Here we see these were rockets. They were called Katyushas rockets. They made a really scary sound. I'm going to play this here for you. You get the idea. They made that really scary sound, and they start firing these rockets into Berlin. Now, the Soviet troops start to surround the city, and by the 24th, they completely encircled Berlin. Here we see on the map, they were moving up and around. You can see the Elbe River. This is the furthest the American troops had gone. So the Soviets started surrounding it and cut off anyone from getting in or out of Berlin. Now, the Berlin defenses, you got to remember the military pretty much has been decimated, so there's not much left. So there's some army and SS soldiers. There's also Hitler Youth and a new organization called the Volkssturm. These were mostly older men, World War I veterans. I like this picture. It's a 14-year-old boy that was brought into the SS. He looks like he's ready to go there with his machine gun belt and his hand grenades and his machine gun and that big smile. No idea what ever happened to him, though, but we pretty much can guess. This was a award ceremony. Here's another one. This was actually a 12-year-old boy that was given the Iron Cross by Hitler because he had just knocked out a Soviet tank. These boys were very lucky. They were captured by the Americans. And here we see some of the older guys, the World War I veterans, men in their 40s and 50s. Those things they have over their shoulders are called Panzerfaust. They were these very good anti-tank weapons that the Germans had invented. And of course, here has Grandpa being taught how to use one. They were going to use everyone here to defend Berlin. Yep, going to even show Mom how to fire one. Hitler orders anyone who retreats to be shot. There were actually SS groups wandering around Berlin looking for anyone who was not fighting, and they would actually hang them from trees or streetlights. Now, the Soviets battled toward the center of Berlin. They're fighting house to house as the older men and the Hitler Youth and what's left of the German army, policemen, anyone who could hold and fire a weapon is firing back at the Germans. But slowly the Soviets push in. They just have too many men. Now, the Soviets' goal was the Reichstag building. Now, in 1933, if you remember, we had there was the Reichstag fire, and the building was gutted. It was never rebuilt. It was left a burnt-out shell throughout the entire war. Now, on April 28th, General Henrici, as I mentioned before, rejected Hitler's command to hold Berlin at all costs, and he was actually relieved of command. Hitler replaced him with General Kurt Student the next day. Student, who was outside Berlin, was ordered into Berlin to help defend the city, but on his way in, he was actually captured by the British. On April 30th, the Soviets captured the Reichstag. Here we see the famous picture of the Soviet soldiers on the roof of the Reichstag building. Um, they're holding the hammer and sickle flag. Even though they did capture the Reichstag, Hitler was still back here in the Reichstag, which is about 10 blocks away. So he was still there. And one of the things, interesting pictures, some people here have looked at this and say, well, who are these people? But they're actually statues that were up on the Reichstag building. All right, let me get rid of these here and moving on. Here's a picture I took on the top of the Reichstag roof. You can see that statue is still there. And these things here up front is where the Soviet soldiers were climbing on. But I couldn't really recreate that picture because the angle they were on, they climbed up on things they don't let you climb up on today. And certainly I did not want to fall off the roof. Here we see a picture of the Reichstag building, excuse me, after the war. It was just an empty shell. And here it is today. After World War II ended, that shell remained that way for like the next 45 years until Germany reunited in 1990. And they rebuilt the Reichstag building with this brand new glass dome on the top. Here's a picture I took from the front of the building. We did get a chance to go inside and get a tour of the dome, which is really cool. Inside that dome, there's this column of mirrors. And what it does is it reflects the sunshine from outside the dome down into the Reichstag chambers. Now, Hitler remains in the bunker beneath the chancellery. This is an actual recreation. It's actually kind of controversial. Very recently, they recreated what Hitler's bunker, or at least his living room, looked like in the bunker. This is a recreation. Above his desk, you can see he has a portrait of Frederick the Great. This is a recreation of the couch that he would spend his last seconds in at the end of the war. So this is actually a recreation of the bunker. Here's a picture of him and his girlfriend, Eva Braun, having dinner. Now, Hitler announced that he would stay in Berlin until the end. He was not going to leave. There were a number of people who tried to get him to leave, but he said no, he would not. Now, Goering announces since Hitler is cut off, he is in charge. Hitler orders that Goering be arrested for treason. After that, Hitler hears a report that Himmler is negotiating a surrender with the Allies. Hitler orders that Himmler be arrested for treason. On April 29th, a little after midnight, Hitler marries Eva Braun in the bunker. They had been his girlfriend for a number of years. Here they are with their dogs. This was down at his home at Berchtesgaden, and happier times for them. And then that night, on April 30th, Hitler and Eva Braun commit suicide in the bunker. Here are some American soldiers that were in the bunker. There's the couch. You can actually see blood stains on it from where Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun took poison. She was on the other side of the couch. This is a recreation of what the bunker looked like underground. This was the actual room where he committed suicide in. This was his living room. All right, this was beneath the, it was about 30 feet below ground, as you can see here, where the ground is above here. They took his body out, up through here, up the steps, out into the chancellery. This was here, this was his map room, and this was his outer office. And his bedroom was over here. Oh boy, I got a lot of circles in there. All right, let me get rid of all these. Okay. Here is the shell. The Soviets were bombing the city, and this is one of the bomb craters or shell craters that they put Hitler and Eva Braun in. They doused a couple 100 gallons of gasoline on their bodies and then set them on fire. Hitler didn't want even his body to be recovered by the Soviets. Of course, now word is out, Hitler is dead. On his death, in his will, he actually names Admiral Karl Dönitz, the head of the German Navy, as the new Reich president, as the new head of the government. Kind of a strange thing because the Navy was never really supportive of Hitler, but that's who's put in charge. The next day, Goebbels and his wife commit suicide. They did so after killing their 6 children, who were ages 4 to 12. Here we see a nice picture. His wife had been married earlier. The man in the uniform in the background was actually her son from her first marriage. He actually survived the war. He was a Luftwaffe officer, but actually survived the war. Over 7,000 people committed suicide throughout Germany in April of 1945. Many of them would rather die, they said, than live in a world without Hitler. All right, May 2nd, Berlin surrenders to Marshal Zhukov. The battle ended after a week of heavy fighting because the Germans just simply ran out of men and materials. There was nothing left to shoot back at the Russians. Now, the Soviet troops, not the frontline soldiers, but these were the backup soldiers who came in. They just looted homes, they raped women, murdered civilians. This went on for several weeks after the fall of Berlin. May 3rd, German troops in Denmark and the Netherlands surrender. On May 8th, German troops in Norway surrender. So that is basically it. Now, May 8th, the German High Command and most of the German army surrender unconditionally to the Allies. Here we see Eisenhower. They're having a drink to celebrate the end of the war. Now, the war in Europe is over. It's called VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. Here we see the royal family on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Winston Churchill obviously is in the center. On either side is the King and Queen, King George the Sixth and his wife Elizabeth. And we see his 2 daughters on the outside. The woman on the far left, she was, I think, 18 years old at this time. That is the current Queen Elizabeth II of England, who just turned 93. Is that right, 93?
I think 94.
Maybe 94, okay.
94.
All right, just turned 94 a few weeks ago. Here's Times Square, big celebration, celebrating the end of the war in Europe. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is the Nuremberg trials. Now, after the war, many Nazis fled. Some went to Argentina, like Adolf Eichmann. He would be captured by the Israeli secret police, the Mossad, in 1950. Basically, they would kidnap him out of his off the streets near his home, and he would actually be smuggled onto a commercial airliner, a Israeli airliner, flown back to Israel, where he was put on trial, found guilty of war crimes, and hanged by the Israeli government. They actually just made a movie about that. Fred, what was the name of the movie? Do you remember?
Which one?
The one on Eichmann?
Operation Finale.
Oh, Operation Finale just came out 1 or 2 years ago. It was starred Ben Kingsley as Adolf Eichmann, one of the most ruthless Nazis. Ironically, Ben Kingsley won an Oscar for playing Mahatma Gandhi earlier in his career. But yes, some did flee and made it to Argentina. Some became prisoners, Hermann Goering being one of them. Some of the other top Nazis, Albert Speer, Rudolf Hess. Others committed suicide to escape justice. We know that Hitler committed suicide. Goebbels committed suicide in the bunker. Himmler, when he was caught by the British, he committed suicide also. He took cyanide. When they were questioning him, and when they were brought a dentist in to examine their teeth, what a lot of the top Nazis did is they had holes drilled in their teeth and had the cyanide capsules placed in them. So using their tongue like this, they could pop the cyanide out and then bite into it and you'd be dead in seconds. So they were bringing a dentist in to check his teeth, and then Himmler knew that they would find it, so he committed suicide rather than be a prisoner. Martin Bormann tried to escape Berlin. No one knew whatever happened to him. It wasn't discovered till later on that when he realized he was trapped, he also took cyanide. Now, the Allies after the war were horrified by the atrocities of the death camp. We talked earlier about General Eisenhower making sure everything was filmed and photographed so that nobody in the future would try to say it never happened. And it's a really good thing since people are saying it today. That's why there's such a preponderance of evidence. A lot of it thanks to Eisenhower, and also, because the Nazis kept records of everything. So the Allies decided they're going to put the top Nazis leaders on trial, show the world what they did. Churchill and Stalin just wanted to shoot everyone, but the Americans wanted to give them an open and fair trial. Ironically, something the Germans never did. So they chose Nuremberg. It was basically the city of the party rallies. Remember, we had the Triumph of the Will. This was like the spiritual heart of Germany. They wanted to use it as a symbolic value in making it the place of the Nazi Party's demise by putting on the trial their top leaders and executing anyone they found guilty. Now the trial is going to last 10 months. Now the US, the British, the Soviets, and the French would conduct the trials. They would be the prosecution. They also were the judges. The US Supreme Court Justice, he was actually a member of the United States Supreme Court, Robert Jackson, was actually the US prosecutor, sent over to Germany to be their prosecuting attorney. Now, 21 Nazi political and military leaders were defendants, including Hermann Goering and Karl Dönitz, the Navy leader. Here we see Goering giving testimony. Goering liked the fact that he was given the #1 position among all the other Nazis. It gave him some sort of thrill to know that he was now the leader for whatever reason. This courtroom is still actually was used by the German government afterwards for trials. And a couple of years ago, it was actually closed down because they were moving to a new room. And they've actually made it into a memorial, not a memorial, a museum. A museum. So if you travel to Nuremberg, you can actually visit the courtroom. And there's a display there about some of the stuff that went on during the trials. Now, Franz von Papen, he was the old chancellor before Hitler, who hated Hitler, was actually put on trial, and nobody knew why. Now, of the 21, 12 were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The German generals Jodl and Keitel, the foreign minister von Ribbentrop, and 15 others were hanged on October 1st, 1946. Their bodies were cremated. I put down Dachau here, but I found out recently, I got to change this on my PowerPoint recently, that they weren't actually cremated. This was a rumor that was put out, and they were actually taken to a crematorium near Munich and cremated there. Their ashes were dumped in the river because they didn't want to have any memorial place or any graves where future Nazi lovers, like we see today, the neo-Nazis, could go and, memorialize them. Goering was also sentenced to death, but he committed suicide the night before. One of the American officers who was there to guard him smuggled in a cyanide capsule for him. So the next morning when they came to get him for the hangings, he was already dead. Now, 3 others, including Admiral Raeder and Rudolf Hess, got life sentences. 4, including Admiral Dönitz and Albert Speer, he was the Minister of Munitions and so on. He was Hitler's architect. They got 15 to 20 years. 3, including von Papen, were acquitted, and they did go through trials with in Germany, separate trials by the German government, but they were acquitted and not sent to jail. One of the ironies of it is the Rudolf Hess here. You can see he got a life sentence. He had during the war he had actually flown to England to try to even work out a deal with the British, and he was placed under arrest and put in jail. He had been there throughout the entire war. They brought him back for the trials. He was given a life sentence, and he was sent to Spandau prison up in Berlin, along with Dönitz and Speer and Raeder. Now, many of the others had already been released from the prison, so Hess was the only one in there. In it was 1987. He was 93 years old, and they were actually talking about releasing him because he was an old man and wasn't very healthy when he committed suicide by hanging. himself. So it's kind of a weird thing why he did that when he was 93 years old. He actually was the only prisoner in the prison. He had his own garden, and he actually there was a fan or something, used the extension cord. So it's kind of strange that he did that. Martin Bormann, who was the successor to Hess as the Nazi Party secretary, he was believed to have escaped and sentenced to death in absentia. Of course, they found his remains in Berlin in 1972. He was right near the Berlin train station. They were doing some construction, and then they found a skeleton down below ground, and they did it, checking his teeth. They found glass shards in the teeth, and the teeth matched up with Martin Bormann. So they realized he never did make it out of Berlin. All right, so this wraps up the end of the war for the Nazis. Hope you enjoyed it and at least got something out of it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Our next section, we're going to start talking about the end of Japan. All right, so anyway, goodbye.